Okay, just another minute or so. All right, guys, just a minute to go and then we'll start. Nice to see everybody. Welcome back to class. Just giving us a few more seconds to find the stream and then I'll be right with you. Okay, guys, no time like the present. It's 5:30, so let's get things underway. First of all, glad to be with you guys and hope you're doing well, having a good week, had a nice weekend. One question, just to sort of touch base with you guys. So I figure probably you guys noticed the recorded version of the lecture that I sent to the class from last Wednesday, yeah? Anybody can confirm? Let me know. Okay, good. Yeah, so I have like a separate YouTube channel that runs at the same time as I'm doing the Zoom feed with you guys. So I capture the recording there, and that's my way of redistributing the lectures back to you when we have a couple of these virtual lectures first few weeks. So I'll do that this week as well. Rasul, I sent it to class Canvas announcements. Since you're here at this meeting, you must have found the link. So it's in the same set of announcements that I post. That's the only mass messaging system that I use. So everything you find from me, whether it's like prompts, class announcements, links, videos, whatever, they'll always be in the Canvas announcements. But you should be able to find them then now, and you could go back and replay it anytime. But it was
awesome. I just missed it then. Thanks.
Oh yeah, no, not to worry. Yeah, but it was just the recorded version of the Wednesday lecture from last week, and I'm recording this one, and I'll do the next one on Wednesday as well. So you'll have at least a few of our first lectures on tape. Okay, and then just to, kind of get us all engaged here, feel free to say hello, leave a comment, something along those lines, and that'll be good to sort of bring us into this meeting tonight. Okay, thank you so much, Madeline, Giovanni, Patrick, Remix, Sarah, Aaron, Sophia, Juliana, Kais, Sarah, Ashley, Christian. Welcome everybody, Drew, Joseph. Yeah, we got some exciting games going on in the NFL. I've been watching for sure. Hey, Angela, Lauren, Karina, and everybody else. Okay, well, welcome back. So today, our game plan is we're going to start with a quick recap of the material that we were covering last Wednesday, just talking a little bit about utilitarian ethical theory a little more. We got through the main point of just describing what the theory is and how it kind of works, what its basic fundamental principles are. But there's a little more I have to still tell you about because there are some objections to the theory that are quite necessary for your full understanding of the topic. So my first point is going to be to go over the summary of the notes that we had from Wednesday. And then we'll press on from there as I talk to you guys about a few of the different objections that the theory faces. So with your help, though, we'll review some of this material. All right. And when I get to something I'd kind of like to ask you about, just see if you can supply me with the right info. All right, so this is a class in ethics. That means that we're studying the theory of morality. Ethical theory is all about morality and moral concepts. And when we reason over morality and ethical concepts, we're talking about stuff like good and bad, right and wrong, just and unjust, moral versus immoral, virtue and vice, how people ought to act versus how they shouldn't act. And in ethics, there are three major categories of action that people divide actions into. So anybody remembers the name of those things? Okay, good. There's morally permissible actions. There's also, contrary to that, what else? So one of them, yes, impermissible, correct. And yet again, there's one further concept we mentioned, which is the morally obligatory actions, right? Okay, and I'll just say a few things about that to just jog your memory. Morally impermissible actions are actions that are wrong, morally wrong actions that are not okay to do. Raping people, killing people, lying, cheating, stealing, you name it. There's all kinds of terrible things. And it's on a spectrum, I guess, some horrible things, genocide, all the way down to less grave moral misdeeds, but they're still bad, whether it's a private lie or, I don't know, an act of academic dishonesty or something like that. Now, another category of actions are the morally permissible ones. Those are actions that are, to the contrary, not wrong, and they are okay to do. And that does include stuff like, rescuing someone from a burning building, giving blood to the, blood bank, or food to the food bank, working at the homeless shelter, volunteering. Yes, but it also includes a whole bunch of other things that don't have any major positive impact one way or the other, but they're also not blameworthy actions that are wrong. So they don't create harm or victimize anybody, whether that's, putting on a pair of glasses, taking a walk, drinking some water, those are all morally permitted actions too. So that covers a pretty big ground. Then there's morally obligatory actions. Those are actions which would be morally required of us, that we're obligated, in other words, to do, and it'd be wrong not to do them. So you can think of the non-performance of any of the obligations as impermissible, the non-performance of any of the impermissible acts as obligations. So like you're morally obligated not to kill, rape, lie, cheat, steal. On the positive side, affirmative moral obligations could include to keep promises, raise one's children who they have custody over, pay for things that you've already consumed or used, and all the rest. I mentioned to you guys also, and I'm just going to repeat this, that morality and law are related, but they're not the same. And that's important to understand because morality is the more basic concept that law tries to take its inspiration from. After all, there can be laws that are, in the judgment of some people, bad laws. And on the other hand, there can sometimes be laws that prohibit conduct that people don't think is bad or wrong. So if you're one of those people who thinks that like recreational drug use should be legalized, then you have a moral critique of the legal status quo. Or if you were a person who thinks that when slavery existed and it was legally instituted, that it was still immoral, then that would be another way of saying that something that was at one time legally allowed is still morally impermissible. And certainly when we make promises, we don't necessarily create legal obligations to follow through, but we do create moral obligations. So sometimes law and morality can coincide. Surely it's illegal and also wrong to commit rape or murder. But in individual cases, we can see a possibility of moral critique of law and so on. Okay, now we then just try to start building up our first big ethical theory, which is the theory of utilitarianism from John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill is probably the primary figurehead behind this philosophy of ethics, but there are some other important people who wrote about it as well, including the man named Jeremy Bentham, who's slightly historically prior to Mill. But Mill has, I think, the sharpest and clearest version of it, and that's why we're focusing on him to start the class. Mill's theory of utilitarianism. First thing I told you is that it is a branch of consequentialist ethical thinking. Okay, so consequentialism says that the right action or the wrong action, whatever, the morality of the action depends on the consequences that follow from the action. Now, consequences are the results that occur because somebody does something. And to a consequentialist moral reasoner or thinker, you would try to just do the actions that create in some way the best consequences overall. Now, utilitarianism is a version of consequentialist ethics, which says that the specific consequences that matter are those that bear on overall human happiness. So what utilitarianism tells us to do is what? Anybody can put it in a sort of clear little brief way. We're always obligated to do what kind of things? What actions are the utilitarians say are right? Act always to promote or cause the greatest result of overall happiness to people. Yes. So take the actions that result in the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So it's all about promotion of happiness. That pinged us to some other quick notes. happiness to the utilitarians is the same thing as pleasure in the absence of pain. And they sometimes speak of the reverse of happiness, which is pain and the absence of pleasure. So looking at it that way, what the utilitarian tells us is to always do the actions that will create the most overall pleasure minus pain for the greatest number of people. Now, why is that something that we ought to live by? Mill gives us a few principles to make this sound reasonable and fair. One thing he says is that the greatest happiness principle is correct, which says that acts are right to the extent that they promote happiness, and acts are morally wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse. So the more pleasure you're creating or pain you're taking away, the better your behavior is morally. And the more pain you are causing and pleasure that you're destroying, the worse your behavior is morally. Now, as a further pillar of support, he offers us this claim, that happiness is the only thing that people pursue as a what? Does anyone know this point? It's the one and only thing he says that we seek as a blank, but not a blank. So, sort of, Madeline, yes. He says that happiness is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means. That's right. So what does this mean? What that is saying is that all of the things we are ever doing in life are really done out of the pursuit of happiness, or in other words, pleasure. And we talked about how if you really look at your own life and you ask yourself what the motives are for everything you're doing, you can see happiness is there lurking in the background in the final analysis. So like you go to school, even if the studying of the topics and all the other obligations are not pleasurable, you're doing it because of the pleasure you believe that you'll get if you're able to somehow attain a degree with the career opportunities and income opportunities that will give to you later. So when you really look at the big picture of everything, we're all going out there trying to find happiness and pleasure. Maybe we're doing it in different ways, but he thinks that's the universal common ground of all people and really all life forms, that we seek our pleasure and happiness. So why not make the maximization of it for all people the moral standard to judge our behavior by? After that, I guess I talked to you about how to apply the theory in one specific type of scenario. And I just randomly chose the example of people trying to choose which pizza topping option would be the right option for a set of people if we knew what their interests and preferences were. So I had some members of the class participate by telling me how they would rank in terms of like a pleasure score, 4 different possible pizza topping options. And when we mathematically added up the total amount of pleasure that each option could result in, we were then able to show which one of the actions would be morally obligatory, at least relative to that set of people. Now, that example is a pretty trivial example, right? It's just about people ordering pizza toppings. It's not like life and death or anything more significant. But if you were a utilitarian, you would make all decisions, including the biggest and most important, all the way down to the little daily ones, according to the same logic and according to the same kind of calculus. You would try to game out in advance how much total happiness would be the product of each action you could take, and then you would systematically try to act in the way that would generate the most overall. We showed that in utilitarianism, sometimes the individual doesn't get their most preferred outcome. Because as an example, if you really wanted pepperoni, but everyone you're with doesn't like pepperoni and they really dislike it, then you'd have to so-called take one for the team in order to take the action in ordering the favored topping that would generate the most happiness for all. We also talked about how in some cases there could be what's called the utility monster. That's one individual or a minority of individuals in a collective whose interests are so dominant and whose pleasures associated with a given outcome are so overwhelming that they can kind of get their way even though they're the minority. That reminds us that it's not about taking a vote and going with the most votes or something, but rather with the actual quantity of pleasure, which can sometimes be held by a minority of people if the quantity of it is sufficiently large. Now, as I was just saying, utilitarianism is not just for choosing pizza toppings, though. So like say you were a legislator, a person serving in Congress or whatever. Now, your question is, should I vote to approve of or defeat a bill, right? And so if you're a utilitarian-minded legislator, you would be making the judgment in the same way we've described. You would consider the 2 possible scenarios, the one in which the bill is approved and the one in which it is defeated, and you would consider how much total human happiness would be produced by all affected if either scenario was to play out. So decisions of policy, life and death, even war, would and can be and sometimes are made according to utilitarian principles and ethical guidance. Now, let's go over a few other objections to the theory that are important to understand. One of them we kind of talked about, the whole utility monster problem. Another one is this, and it's the idea that some have said the theory is a theory fit for swine. In fact, John Stuart Mill himself talked about this objection because it was pressed against him in his own time. Sorry, a theory fit for swine. So I'm going to ask you to tell me what you think it is about this theory that ever made somebody say this. And the phrase of the critic is that it is a theory fit for swine.
Well, that just kind of makes me think that if people get really into utilitarianism, then they could go down the path of overthinking too much and like controlling society and like how things should be.
Okay, yeah.
And I guess the people who want to like administer the most control.
Yeah, so maybe you're saying that it would result in like forms of social engineering that maybe produce a lot of happiness, but that like curtail individual liberty or freedom. Perhaps it's possible, but it's not exactly the substance of this particular criticism. But let me expand on your thought here. You've said that perhaps, and I'll get to you, Sarah. There, I see your hand. You've said that if it's utilitarianism, there might be like requirements for the overall promotion of happiness that tend to disadvantage certain individuals or whatever. I want to make the point that utilitarianism should not be thought necessarily as coextensive with like forms of governance that you might be thinking of, like socialism or whatever. It's totally neutral on the question of what form of social organization or economic theory we should appoint in our society. So if you're a utilitarian and you're convinced by an argument that capitalism or whatever generates the most overall happiness for all members of society, even though in capitalism, you know, there are winners and there are losers, you could still say that that's the proper economic theory to govern and operate according to, because it produces more total happiness than, say, a socialist system would, where everybody is at least guaranteed some median level of income and wealth, but it maybe destroys the ability for the more industrious and enterprising few to attain even higher levels of possible happiness. I make no argument one way or the other, but I'm just trying to point out to you that it's not so straightforward that when you hear utilitarianism, it's like everyone gets like one chicken distributed to them and it's like everyone's equal and so on like that. Inequalities in the distribution of happiness and pleasure are tolerable for utilitarians as long as the bottom line number of total happiness is the greatest. And by the way, you know, capitalists make that argument, right? That capitalist forms of economic organization do tend over time to generate the greater overall happiness in society. But I digress. Just kind of expanding on your contribution, which I thought was interesting. And then, so Sarah, let me know, what do you think is the reason behind the theory fit for swine objection?
I don't actually know it. This is just my speculation.
Sure.
But I hear that and I think kind of like of a dog who only does things to be happy, like they chase the ball because it makes them happy. And I think it's like a critique of that, like you're only chasing your desires.
Very good.
Like an animal.
Yeah, very good. Okay, exactly. So I was going to mention that. So what exactly is a swine, though, exactly? In literal terms, a swine.
A pig.
It's a pig, yeah. It's like a farm animal, like a hog. And so the theory fit for swine is exactly on point with what you've just said, Sarah. So the critic is saying this. The theory is all based on the overall maximization of pleasure and happiness, right? And so some people think that is not a worthy enough goal for something as intelligent and sophisticated as a human being like us. So some people heard the theory and their reaction was, really though, are we supposed to just pursue pleasure at the expense of all else? Should that be like the all-consuming focus of our lives, the pursuit of overall pleasure? Because maybe if we were pigs or animals, that would be appropriate because that's all they can do. You know, a pig is gonna what? Eat all day, roll around in the mud, maybe mate, sleep, engage in certain very fundamental activities. But aren't we better than those pigs and animals in the farm? Shouldn't we be striving towards a more worthy goal than just base pleasure? So the critic's point of view yes, the lesson is being recorded to the question I received in the direct messages, but it's not being recorded on Zoom. It's being recorded on YouTube. So all your comments will be reflected in the YouTube version of the video that I distribute and post later, which I posted last week to the last Wednesday meeting. So anyway, just got a question. I want to answer that. No problem. Back to what I was saying, though, theory for swine. People who hear the theory's basic focus on pleasure might find it unsuitable to their view of what's best, because they may think that that tells us to go out and live like pigs, live like animals that can do nothing else except sleep all day, eat, maybe scratch ourselves, reproduce, and things like that. So is this a fair criticism? John Stuart Mill, the arch utilitarian, he does not think that this criticism defeats his theory, and he also has a reply to it. So let me try and explain to you how Mr. John Stuart Mill takes on this criticism and tries to dispel it. What Mill says is that the critic has a mistaken view about what the theory is telling us to pursue. Yes, it tells us to pursue pleasure, okay, that's fair. But it doesn't necessarily tell us to only pursue the kind of pleasures that pigs are capable of experiencing. In Mill's judgment, there are actually two types of pleasures that human beings like us can experience, okay? So there's two types of pleasures. Okay, so on the one hand, we have higher pleasures, and then lower pleasures. Okay, and so the real easy way to define the concepts are these. He says when it comes to the higher pleasures, those are pleasures that only human beings are even capable of experiencing, because it takes something as intelligent and advanced as a human to be able to even do or understand these things. So higher pleasures, pleasures that only humans can experience or enjoy. They're reserved exclusively for smart life forms like us. So pleasures that only humans can enjoy. And then the lower pleasures, I'm sure now you can sort of just infer, these are pleasures that non-human animals are capable of enjoying and experiencing. Okay, so that's here. Pleasures. Okay, so what I've written here is just that Mill, in reply to this objection, theory fit for swine, he says that there's two types of pleasures, higher and lower. Okay, let me put that in the chat really fast, even though I know it is on the board, just to be fully detailed. Okay. Two types of pleasures, higher and lower. And I'll spare you the typed out definition because you can see it on the board. The higher pleasures are the pleasures that only humans can enjoy. The lower ones are those that animals, apart from humans, can also enjoy. So let me ask you guys here in the chat, what could be some of the, maybe we can start with the lower pleasures, okay? So what are some of the lower pleasures? These are things that you don't have to be a human being to understand and enjoy. Okay, very good, Sarah. Food, the consumption of food. It's a necessary thing for our survival, and so we're biologically equipped with some kind of reward mechanism for taking in the food that we need. And there, you guys have enjoyed eating, and it's not only unique to humans, animals can enjoy that too, okay? So let's see what else. I see a lot of stuff showing up. Eating, food, okay, good. Sex, yeah, so reproduction, right? There's a biological imperative for the survival of the species to, pass on our genes to the next generation and have offspring. So we're also given a reward mechanism biologically for that. And of course, animals are induced in the same way to reproduce, and therefore it's not uniquely human, the pleasures of reproduction and sex. Sleep, that's another good one. Yeah, you don't have to be Albert Einstein or Beethoven to enjoy sleeping. You can be a simple cat, dog, non-human animal of whatever kind. Sleep is necessary for healthy survival, and so that's another non-human pleasure. But of course, we can enjoy these pleasures too. They're just not exclusive to humans. Drinking water, sure, Kais, that would kind of fill within the same realm of food and sustenance. Drugs, you say, Carl, that's interesting, right? the appreciation of the effect of drugs is in a way something that only a human can fully understand, because only a human can really know what process they're going through to induce these altered states of consciousness. I mean, if you give drugs to like an animal, it's possible they will enjoy it. I've heard of these experiments where you give lab rats and stuff, opiates or whatever, or stimulants, and they keep wanting more. So that's always been a kind of gray area case to me for that reason. Like, cognitively speaking, it's a pleasure that any life form could enjoy, but the systematic inducement of it for the sake of the pleasure itself is kind of a uniquely human thing. So it's a little bit gray area to me. Seeing someone you like, I mean, well, that's more, when you talk about someone you like, it sounds like the social world that we live in as humans. But perhaps, yes, in the animal world, there are companions, animal friends. And in that case, there are collectives of animals, wolf packs and other things. You could see something along the same lines, perhaps. Warmth, sure. Voiding your bladder or whatever, as you would call it, using the bathroom. Of course, the animal's not really using a bathroom per se, but yes, I understand what you mean. Touch, yes. Carnal desires, food, mating, rest. You say catnip. Yeah, Rasul, a little specific because it's only for the cats, but yeah, it's part of the drug thing, I guess you could say. Okay, so that's a good range of things. Let me just repeat some of the highlighted items there. There's like sleep, food, mating, activity of whatever kind, maybe like running around, touch, warmth, apart from certain maybe Arctic life forms or whatever, but with those exceptions noted. Those are some of the lower pleasures. Okay, good. Now, on the other hand, though, what are higher pleasures? What are certain things that, humans can only enjoy these things? Okay, so very good, Joseph, taking a philosophy class, right. So being able to even understand the concepts that we are now discussing, it's uniquely human. Art, the creation of art and the appreciation of art, another one I would say, yes. Making money, well, yeah, the whole world of finance and even understanding that money can be used as a medium of exchange for goods and services, that's unique to humans. Let's say, you say love, Carl. That one I believe is a bit of a controversial example, only because I don't necessarily think it's impossible for non-human animals to experience love. Any of us who have had pets, or if you see the care that exists, at least in mammal life, between like parent and offspring, the way that they'll nurture, take care of, and in some cases even die for the sake of their next of kin, it's possible that there could be, I think, love in the animal world. But, education, yeah, so education in any academic discipline, okay, whether it's history, literature, science, communications, you name it, right? There's no such thing as an animal that can appreciate any of these academic topics, and the pleasure that comes from understanding them, that's also unique to us. Consuming media, sure. Shopping, traveling. Now, I mean, animals can be transported around, but they can't desire to appreciate like the culture, cuisine, or environmental differences of these different places where humans travel. And so there's I think, fair example too. Starting a business. There's a few things in there that I would have hoped maybe we'd point right out. Language, right? I mean, even the fact that you can understand these sounds and that you can convert them into meaningful ideas. There's no such thing in the animal world. I mean, animals can sometimes be induced to respond to certain commands or whatever, but there's no such thing as a vocabulary and grammar that can be deployed at will to construct just a random new string of sentences. Like, there's a purple cow standing on the moon. When I say that to you, the image is in your mind, but there's no sounds I could ever make to any animal that would bring into their mind the same associations. So whether it's language, literature, art, dance, sport, another one, the highly regulated way that we have rules in sports, and not just, animals kind of tussling around in the field. So anyway, hopefully this is coming through to you, that there are higher pleasures that stand over and beyond the lower pleasures. And so now let's kind of complete this point. How does Mill then reply back to his critic? So taking a step back, here's the state of play. Mill says, utilitarianism is the right ethical theory to live by. And what it tells us to do is to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people every time we do something. Now, a critic says, I don't follow you, Mill, or I don't agree, because what you're telling me to basically do is live like a pig. Is this a theory for swine? Sounds like it, because you're telling me what my whole life should be focused on every day, all the time, is the maximization of total pleasure. But pleasure strikes me, says the critic, as something that's not worthy of the preoccupation of an intelligent human being. It's something that's more appropriate to the lifestyles of animals who can only pursue base pleasures. So what? Should we just sit around all day eating, sleeping, mating, scratching ourselves? that's not right. We're humans and we should have a more noble, more perhaps intellectually dignified goal. And that's where Mill says, okay, I never said that we should preoccupy our lives with just what? The lower pleasures. So he thinks his critic misunderstands the account. The critic hears pleasure and thinks this is what pleasure means, lower pleasures. But Mill now is careful to point out that when we talk of pleasure, there's a whole variety of possibilities. There's the lower pleasures that we have in common with animals, but then there are also higher pleasures which are unique to us and really that make us human beings and that characterize the human experience and the human condition. So he says, I'm not going to agree with my critic. This is not a theory for swine. It's a theory about pleasure, yes, but that does not mean that it's about swine because there are higher pleasures too. And so Mill really kind of makes it clear to everyone that reads him that the higher pleasures are better and more worthy. So not only is it that we can enjoy these higher pleasures, but he even goes out of his way to say that they matter more. So much so that he claims, and this is a famous quotable quote of him, that it is better to be a human being unsatisfied than a fully satisfied pig. Better to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a fully satisfied fool or ignoramus. And he's saying that because even though sometimes we see the lives of animals being fully satisfied, like if you have a pet cat or dog, for example, you may sometimes see them just lounging around, being fed all day, petted and cared for, and think, wow, isn't that the life? You know, I wish I could trade my position for theirs and to have a life of pleasures with no human concerns. But Mill says that nobody really seriously means that. When we say that, we're kind of half joking, we're being facetious. Because think about what would really be involved if you were to trade your intellectual sophistication for that of an animal. You might be more fully satisfied, but you would never read again. You would never be able to understand a film again. You would never be able to play a musical instrument or engage in a sport or study some topic in college. So Mill believes that his theory, even if it is about pleasure, it's not about the lower ones necessarily. It's about all pleasures that humans are capable of enjoying, with a special focus on the higher ones, because he thinks that they actually have greater weight. And he thinks that's evident to you because he says if you really reconsidered it and thought about it deeply, you would never trade your human position for a more fully satisfied position of a non-human animal. Okay, so human life can be complicated, right? We have to go to school, we have to make a place for ourselves, we have to learn all kinds of interesting and detailed topics. But it's still a greater state of being than that of an animal because the pleasures that we have are of such a greater rank and they're so much higher in value. Okay, so that's the first other objection that I wanted to hit you guys with today, the theory fit for swine thing. Critics of Mill have said it's all about low pleasures, and he says, nah, it's about all pleasures. He talks about the higher ones, says what they are, and he goes to some trouble to try and make the point that these pleasures are actually even more important and worthy than the lower ones. So he says, don't characterize me as a person who says, go out and live like a pig. Pursue all the pleasures humans can enjoy, including morality, fine art, conversation, career, education, and all the rest. So it's not all just about like sex, eating stuff, sleeping, getting warmth, or getting touch. Now, there are a couple of other objections to the theory that I just want to briefly touch on. And then we're going to move on to the next theory, which is the work of Immanuel Kant. These next two objections, I think, are quite difficult for the theory to deal with. One of them especially, I think, is the toughest of all. So two more objections to utilitarianism. Okay, so one of these other objections can be the point that in utilitarianism, it could be seen as too demanding for us to really live this way or to live up to these standards. Too demanding, one point of objection. And then this second one here is the one that I think is really the big problematic, troubling objection for a utilitarian. This is the one that, if I was really looking into it, would be the one that would give me the greatest pause and make me really wonder whether it's the proper theory. And this objection is the idea that no action, no type of action, is absolutely forbidden in principle. Okay? Okay, so two more big objections to the utilitarian theory. Let me just add that to the text of the chat. So one, too demanding. And yeah, and then the other is, as you see, no action, no type of action is absolutely forbidden in principle. Okay, so let me speak on these points. First of all, about it being demanding. So in what type of situation or in general do you think that this theory of utilitarianism might be seen to be too demanding, to place too much of a burden on us? Like, in what cases does the theory impose a burden on us that might be hard to live up to? Can anybody think of such an example, or just in general? If someone says you got to always do the thing that generates the most overall happiness, when does that pose a burden on you? What do you think?
When you have to make a sacrifice for other people's happiness?
Yes, exactly. Very good. So when you have to do something that is going to generate the most overall happiness, but when it conflicts with your own personal preference or desired outcome. Now, very good, Sarah, Aaron, and the rest that have answered this question. Now, sometimes the sacrifices might be trivial, and you might think, well, that's fair, and it's not too bad. Of course, morality, it probably shouldn't be thought of as just doing whatever you want all the time. Certainly, sometimes doing the right thing is hard, requires sacrifice and other things like that. So if you're ordering pizza and you're one person out of four who, wants pepperoni and they all want sausage, you might say, well, that's fine. I'm not getting my favorite pick, but it's the best thing for everyone overall, and so I'm not too bothered by it. But when does it end, okay? For example, there could be cases where the theory would seem to obligate you to do things that fundamentally strike against your vested interests, the loyalties that you have formed, and the bonds that you formed with people. You're not allowed to, for example, show favoritism to the people who have closer relationships with you than others. So, like, here's an example. Suppose, and I'm sure many of you guys have touched on philosophy or learned a little of it in the past, know this, but if you don't, just understand there's always going to be hypothetical scenarios. They're going to be like scattered throughout our whole semester, and that's just a hallmark of philosophical writing all the time. There's hypothetical scenarios, sometimes they're called thought experiments, but we just pose these examples to you so that you can formulate your ideas about certain arguments and concepts. So here's a hypothetical, or if you want to call it a thought experiment. Suppose that there's a house burning. Actually, there's two of them burning, okay? So there's people that occupy both of the houses. And here you are, you're present on the scene, you're a bystander. But what you see is that at an equal distance from you to the left and to the right, there are these two burning buildings occupied by people, all right? Now, when you look over here to the left, the house, it's occupied by like 20 people, okay? 20 people, and they're all saying, hey, come over here. We need your help. We can't exit this building. We need you to simply come prop open the door. Time is running out. We're suffering from smoke inhalation, and we're going to get severely burned and killed unless you come right over here and help us out. There's 20 of us. It's a big group. So you want to go help them, right? But the problem is this. You don't know those people. You have no problem with them. I'm sure you want to save human lives. But in the other house over here to your right, there's a number of people in that house too, but it's a much smaller number. Let's say it's just 3 people. So it's 3 versus 20. Seems easy, right? Which house should you go to? The big one with a bunch of people, because you can save more life. But let me tell you this, the 3 people here, they're 3 dear loved ones. So who are your favorite people? Mom, brother, best friend, Let's say that those are the 3 people, or whoever 3 people matter the most to you. So those people are in the right-hand house, and they're looking straight at you like, hey, I love you. Come over here, Can't let me perish in the flames. Right. Now, if you've understood my hypothetical, then maybe you can follow it through to the conclusion. If it's pure utilitarianism, what would be the so-called right action here? What's your obligation? To rescue which group? The larger group of people, and why? That's correct, but why? It's easy enough to say. Because Creates more happiness, right? So, just think about the consequences of the two life-saving actions. And by the way, I'm going to stipulate something. It's a forced choice scenario, so there's not enough time to rescue both. I know you'd like to say, well, in this hypothetical, I'm just going to heroically save everybody. But I'm just making it a scenario in which you're forced to choose, and by going to one, you thereby eliminate the opportunity to save the other. Okay, so 20 versus 3. These 20 people have more total survival to be secured, right? So by saving the larger group, you prevent the larger amount of overall pain that the more numerous group would have suffered if they had all perished in the flames, plus the associated harms and pains suffered by their loved ones and friends, which are additional negative consequences for human happiness. Now, these 3 people that you love matter a lot to you and a lot to other people too, but the 20 anonymous strangers have friends, lives, and livelihoods of their own. So what's going to suit the greater overall human happiness, irrespective of your personal attachments, is going to the larger group. But many people, I'll get to your example there in a minute, Remick, but yeah, many people hearing such an example would say, this is where the theory breaks down for me, because I could never realistically abandon the loyalties that I have formed with close loved ones in an effort to save a greater number of unknown persons. But utilitarian theory doesn't really give us the opportunity to say that, because it's insensitive to the identities of whose pleasure is promoted, you see. So if there's a greater amount of human happiness that can be obtained by seeking the benefit of totally unknown persons, then that would be right action required by the theory. Many of us feel that's a bridge too far, though. We should be allowed and we should be morally licensed to favor some over others and to have partial feelings for some over others. Now, Remick, you asked this. What if the 20 people are extreme criminals? Okay. Well, in that case, maybe the equation changes a little bit and it changes the hypothetical. Maybe if these are criminals who would have gone on to kill many more people than you have saved, then you could say that certainly would not have been the right action to take. But if you don't tell me more about what kind of crimes they have committed, it's still a little ambiguous. I mean, crime is a broad concept. Maybe these are people who smoked marijuana or something and violated federal laws. But maybe you don't think that that's really the worst thing to do, or pirating DVDs, as you said, Aaron. So the devil's in the details, isn't it? But I take your point. If we add information that my original hypothetical didn't have, then we could construct a version of the scenario where it actually is optimistic to seek the survival of the smaller group, but without providing all that additional, stipulations. The case as given does obligate us to save the larger but anonymous group, and for many people, that's just too demanding. Okay, now Sarah, you had a question, maybe?
Could you theoretically argue that saving the 20 people would actually cause more pain? Because, I don't know, in my mind, I was like, if my loved ones saw me running to save the others, they'd probably feel really betrayed.
Maybe, but are these loved ones utilitarians, my friend? Because then they would say to you, please, I'll always love you, but duty calls. Go and save that bigger number of people. I'm going to die for their sake. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying, it's a little complicated, right? If they had the most upstanding ideals in terms of preserving human life, then they might be willing to say, I understand that you have this greater calling, even though it's going to destroy, my survival chances. But no, to take your point as you put it, though, maybe the betrayal of the friends, if they were a different sort of cast of mind, would in your view be a more substantial amount of pain. But it's a psychic pain that only lasts for a brief moment, whereas in the case where 20 people have died, all their future possible happiness has been extinguished by that event. So I don't know, it's kind of playing with numbers a little bit, but in the original unmodified version of the case, there's just a greater number of people in one house than the other, and therefore there's more pleasure to be preserved and pain to be avoided by helping that group. In the chat here, people have different obligations that take priority, like a father to his daughter would take more priority to him than another handful of children. Yes, exactly. And so these are the kind of examples that are sometimes given to make you think twice about whether this is really the right theory. Madeline, if we base our decisions on what life the persons at risk have committed, isn't that an additional conflict since we'd be playing God? Well, yeah, I mean, does God exist? Who knows? But you'd certainly be taking decisions into your own hands about your judgment as to what will cause a greater amount of overall happiness. If happiness is the good, then more of it is better. So it just gets back to the fundamental assumptions of the theory. Okay, now last thing is this, though. So you might find favor with the critics. You're an individual, and we all have our own interpretation and our own evaluations to make here. So some people will say, the theory stands strong, and I can understand what it's saying despite the objections. Other people will hear objections, and they'll say, you know what, now I don't really think I can agree with some of the claims the theory makes. And that's just how philosophy is. We're presented with different paradigms, arguments, perspectives, and you, the individual, will make judgments. In my own mind, I find some favor with the theory, but some of these objections do bother me a bit, especially this one that now we'll talk about. Okay, so let me ask you some questions. In utilitarian theory, as you currently understand it, is it always wrong to lie? Is it always wrong to lie? What do you say? In utilitarian thought? No, it's not. Okay, good. Can anybody kind of give me a sort of, not necessarily a specific example, but like in what kind of case would lying be the good thing to do? In utilitarian views, it would be good to lie if lying created more pleasure than telling the truth did, right? Okay. And so lying to protect someone, hiding Jews from Nazis, examples, those are good examples, right? But there are also other examples you can think of. Like someone asks you, did you like the meal that I cooked, at the potluck, and it almost made you sick, it was disgusting to you, but you don't want to tell them that because that will really hurt their feelings, whereas the lie will just make them feel good. So you might say, actually, this doesn't bother me, this doesn't sound so bad, it's a little white lie, but it's for the sake of making a person happy. So that utilitarian answer might not be too problematic to you, but when does it stop, okay? So if I'm justified in lying morally, whenever the lie will create more happiness than telling the truth, then what if someone's like cheating on their partner, and their partner just asks them, have you ever done that? By lying, they will prevent the person from being hurt. But by telling the truth, of course, it will hurt them a lot, and maybe it will hurt the relationship. So should we just lie and conceal wrongdoing if the truth will make people upset? After a while, you start to think this sounds like an open invitation to live dishonest lifestyle. Okay, but here's other examples. Is it always wrong to steal in utilitarianism? What can we say? Again, the answer is no. And in general, the answer is always no. There's no specific act type that's ruled out in principle. Everything's on the table, as it were, if that specific action could generate more total happiness than the alternative. So, theft. If you're thinking of a person stealing a loaf of bread to feed their starving child, you might say, fine, I don't really see a problem with that. Morally speaking, it is theft, but it's a righteous act of theft. But how far does this go? Should we just be all like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor? Suppose that you hung out at a wealthy friend's house and you saw like a precious family heirloom that you could easily take and that's in their closet. They would never even notice it's gone. Then you sell it on the black market and use the money to fund cancer research or a children's hospital in the third world. Maybe that's going to create more happiness in the world than the retention of their possession because they're not even doing anything with it and maybe don't even appreciate it. But after a while, it starts to sound like this would lead to a chaotic social order. So that's another problem about the case of theft. Now, here's the one that really gets to me, though. Is it always wrong to kill an innocent person in utilitarianism? Now, and Sarah, I'm getting to your question, I guess, right at the same time. And again, the answer is not necessarily, and it just depends. Okay? Now, this is a pretty wild example, but let's get it on the table. Sometimes this example is used to press this objection against utilitarian theory. And it's called the transplant scenario. So transplant scenario. Okay, now in the transplant case, here's what we are told. There are, let's see, 5 people here. Okay, 5 people. And the problem they have is this. Each one is suffering from a different specific type of vital organ failure, or at least an important internal organ is failing. So they need transplants, essentially, in order to secure the organs they need to survive. And they all need a different one, as just chance would have it. So this guy needs a new heart, new lung, new liver, kidney, other kidney, okay, just as an example. So they all need these different transplanted organs. If they don't receive them in a short amount of time, they're going to die from their existing problems. So they go to the doctor guy, and so I'm just giving you a little more of a visual. Here's our doctor. And they go to this guy and they say, hey, can you help us? We're looking for some organs to sort of help us survive. We're all suffering from these different organ failures, blah, blah, blah. So he looks at their information, and here's what he sees. Actually, and this is convenient, they all have the same blood type. And because of that, you actually would only need how many donors if you could find one that was got all the needed organs. Since they all have this matching blood type, you just need one donor, okay? And if that one donor was available, then their variety of organs could be supplied to all 5 to save them. So the heart, lung, kidney, whatever, liver could come from the one individual that has a matching blood type. Problem though, this matching blood type is extremely rare. And so you may be thinking now, then how do 5 people have it? I told you it's a hypothetical scenario, so let's just say that's a coincidence. But anyway, moving beyond that, this doctor needs to try and find someone with the mysterious XXX blood type that's very hard to locate. He's looking through all the donor lists, looking. He's not finding anybody. So he's about to go in there and deliver the news to these guys waiting in the lobby. Sadly, I'm sorry, guys. I did my due diligence, but I can't find a suitable match, so I can't help you out. Right though, as he's about to do that, who comes in off the street? A young, healthy person, could be you, but somebody like you, okay? Healthy, in the prime of their life, no real health problems. They just want to go to the doctor to, I don't know, routine physical checkup, just their being proactive. But he's got a moment before he goes back to speak with these folks. So he sees this new patient, and the doctor sees what interesting fact about this newcomer to the hospital. The young, healthy person actually, as just total random chance would have it, they do have what? Question. Follow my narrative here? Let's hear it. They do have that matching blood type, exactly. So, he sees this patient, sees their medical chart, sees it's the matching blood type, so wheels are turning in our doctor's mind. He speaks to this patient, and he says, okay, guy, let me ask you a really weird, out there question. So, look, you're coming in just for a basic physical, I know that. And there's no easy way for me to say this, so I'm just going to be very blunt, and I'm just going to put it out there. There's 5 people in the next ward. They're all suffering from organ failures. They came to me looking for transplants. I can't find anybody because they have this very rare blood type. So I was about to just tell them I can't help you. But then that's when you came in just looking for a physical, and I'm seeing that you have the same blood type. So look, let me just ask you, what do you say? Like, would you be okay with, like, if I took all your organs and gave them to them, and just to be fully, full disclosure, you would never survive. We're talking about basically gutting you, taking all your organs out and transplanting into these 5 people. But you would save their lives. It would be 5 lives saved at the cost of your 1. And if you really think about it, buddy, that's more total survival, isn't it? Because if you go out of here without giving the organs up, you're going to live, but 5 are going to die. And on the other hand, if you give the organs, it's 5 living and 1 dying. So we're going to have a net gain of 4 survivors if you do this. On the other hand, if you don't, it's just way more human beings losing their lives. So, Giovanni, I know you're saying sounds great, open me up, but if this person's anything like you or me or most people, the clear answer is going to be, no, definitely not. 100% no, I'm leaving. Are you even a doctor? Because this is crazy. I have every right to keep living. I'm sorry these guys are sick. I wish no ill will on them. But I can't be used as like a source of spare parts or whatever. I can't be used as a means to their survival. Now, if this was like the most extreme utilitarian doctor ever, then theoretically anyway, the theory would seem to imply that he should, at that point, just kill the person. Forget the fact they don't want to give the organs up. Just take them by force, give them to these 5 people, and now we've done the right thing. Now, this example, it's obviously highly unrealistic and everything, but the point it's making is simply this, that there's no principle in utilitarianism that tells you why this action is wrong. It's just do whatever creates the most overall happiness. And so that is compatible with a lot of unsavory actions that intuitively strike us as fundamentally wrong and out of bounds morally. The homeless man version of the experiment is another case, Joseph. Yeah, you've mentioned that. So some people present it that way. What if we went to the homeless encampment and we found one person there that's actually a drain on human society? They're just taking in welfare payments and maybe they have like petty crime record. So what? They should be used as a source of spare parts. Most of us, and I hope probably you guys, would say, no, that's fundamentally immoral and wrong. Now, I don't want you to come away thinking utilitarianism is just like evil and scary, because clever utilitarians will try to block this objection. They'll come up with reasons as to why this is not what their theory implies. In some versions, they will say, this is such a highly unrealistic scenario that just don't worry about it. It's never going to actually happen. So even if theoretically that would be implied, no such thing is really going to occur. In other versions, they try to modify the theory so that there are rules somehow built into it that you're not supposed to violate. But those are always tricky and tenuous attempts to modify the theory because it starts to deviate from its original principles, which is just maximize utility no matter what. Now I'm looking at some of your other comments because I'm just speaking there. What if the individual would have grown up to cure cancer? Another interesting variation on the hypothetical, but we're not privy to that information in the original unmodified version of the case. So sometimes you gotta like grapple with the cases as given, because there's always a way to like wiggle out of them if you change them, right? If I tell you there's 5 people on a train track and the train's heading towards them, you can flip a switch and it sends it towards one guy on the other track. Would that be okay? And then if you're like, well, what if I just blow up the train and it never hits anybody? Or what if I just, go and take the people off the track so that they can run away? It's fun to think of those permutations of an example, but it also gets away from considering the point as intended by, the theorist or whatever. And Sarah, you make the sort of interesting side point there that it's balanced by the intuition that he could have gone on to be a killer or a dictator or something like that. Okay, now it's all good. That's a very good discussion. So I think we've had our interesting breakdown of utilitarian theory, taking us a little longer than maybe it would have if we were all in person to start our first few class periods, but that's fine. And if we ever need to like modify something in the syllabus later to create room or time, we'll do that as it comes. But for the moment, we're sticking with the list of readings, even if we're one perhaps meeting behind. Now, next thing to then learn about is a competitor, a rival to the utilitarian theory, which is given by Immanuel Kant. It just strikes me, though, mentally, as I'm about to move on, that there's one last thing I want to say about this whole stuff. So remember when I told you that utilitarianism is a branch of what's called consequentialist ethics, which means that it determines the morality of an action based on the consequences that come from it. And to the utilitarian consequentialists, the best consequences are the ones that improve overall human happiness. And so they say, again, do whatever creates the most overall happiness for everybody. Now, there's another kind of consequentialist theory that I just briefly want to mention simply to show you a contrast, and it's called hedonism. Maybe you've heard the word hedonism, or if it rings some kind of bell in your mind, you might have a basic idea. Hedonists say that you should always do the actions that create the most pleasure, but just for who? Anybody have a sense of that, even if it's vague? Just for yourself, right? So to the hedonists, the right action is whatever makes you the happiest. And so if you're in a situation with 3 other people and they don't want the type of pizza that you want, maybe you should just stop hanging out with them or just dominate the situation and insist on your preference, because to hedonists, all that matters is number 1, you. And the first person should always be getting the most happiness that they could possibly have. Only problem with hedonism is that it's really not regarded as a serious moral theory. It's kind of relegated to the sidelines because it sounds less like an invitation to be moral and more like an invitation to live a selfish life that's self-centered, egotistical, unconcerned with anybody else's well-being. And to be fair, a lot of people actually live that way, but the way that ethics tells us to live is supposed to be how you ought to act if you're like morally enlightened, not just how you already have a tendency to act absent any moral instruction whatsoever. Furthermore, hedonism is very hard to put into practice when you're dealing with people whose interests are not all exactly the same, right? So like, if you and other people don't agree on the type of pizza toppings to have, should you just not have friends, or should you kill those people because they don't even matter anyway? Only your happiness matters. It's definitely a sort of dark and perhaps distressing moral theory, but I'm just mentioning it to you so that you know that consequentialism has a couple of branches, utilitarianism being the most well discussed and well received. But hedonism is out there. Some people are hedonists, and in their view of morality, the right thing is just whatever makes them individually the happiest. Okay, now let me see a few other things in the chat here. Don't want to leave any comments behind. Sarah, you say, is there a way to have controlled utilitarianism? Okay, yes, good question. There is. And the word for it is called sometimes restricted or rule utilitarianism, as contrasted with unrestricted, or it's sometimes called act utilitarianism. So the rule utilitarians say that we should build rules that we live by, but the rules themselves over the long run of time will generate the most overall human happiness. And so if you were a so-called rule utilitarian, one of your rules could be never kill an innocent person no matter what. And then if you found yourself in a situation where you could like kill a homeless person to get a bunch of organs for productive, happy members of society, then you still should not do it because it violates your utilitarian rule. So in answer to your question, yes, there are clever attempts to modify the theory so that it doesn't seem to have these pretty extreme implications. Now, going down a little more, I see that we just answered questions about utilitarianism, buying your own pizza. Good. Epicurean thought, Joseph. Yeah, so the Epicureans believed that we should prioritize certain kinds of pleasures, sensuous pleasures, like those that involve eating and so forth. And there is a connection in a way to Epicureanism. The Epicureans talk about the individual's lifestyle being best when it's prioritizing these kinds of sensual pleasures. But utilitarianism talks about a social obligation to maintain and promote the most overall happiness for all. So there's a indirect connection between them. Yes, that's fair. Okay, so now moving on with the, let's say, last 15 minutes or so of class today. I'm just going to start to set us up to have a more detailed discussion next time about the ethical writings of this man, Immanuel Kant. Okay, so Immanuel Kant, he's a German philosopher of the mostly 18th century, but he lived from, I believe, 1724 to 1804. I want to make sure to give you the right dates on that. Yeah, mostly 18th and then slightly into the 19th century, Immanuel Kant. And his ethical system is often just referred to by his namesake of Kantianism. Okay, so Immanuel Kant, let me just put that really fast here. Okay, so now we start to discuss the idea of Kantian ethics. Just a little bit here. Okay, Kantian ethics. Now, the main thing of utilitarianism is that it's based on consequences. It says whatever the results or outcomes are that come from what you do, that determines the morality of your action. But for Kant and the Kantians, those people that follow his views, it's much different. They say that it has to do with the intention behind the act that you do, not the consequences that come from it. So I think when we were first just breaking open the discussion of utilitarianism, I drew a little diagram or a cartoon image like this. Say there's a person, they do an action, this arrow stands for time, and then at the end of the arrow, the letter C here, that just represents the consequences. To the utilitarians, this stuff is all important, and it determines whether they did something right or wrong. You would look to the consequences, and if they were good, it was a good act. Bad consequences, it was a bad act. Okay, but now we're in Kantian land, and it's not this picture anymore. Instead, he says you have to look at the intention and the will that the person had when they committed the act, regardless of the consequences that play out afterwards. So a different picture is suggested by that. Suppose this is a person. They committed an act, but instead of looking forward to the consequences that happen later, we take a look back to the intention that they had in their mind when they committed the act. So I've drawn the letter I in the head space of the stick figure, which is going to stand for the intention that the individual had. So in Kantian ethics, if you act with a good intention, a good will, as he sometimes calls it, then your act is morally acceptable and permitted, even if it generated bad consequences, even if the consequences benefited no one at all. Okay, so the outcomes don't matter, the intention does. It's just a total reversal, really, of utilitarianism, which says the intentions don't matter, only the results. Here's some examples, and we're going to build up much more detail, but I'm starting from a level of general description here. So suppose that somebody saw that there was a car off to the side of the road where the motorist in the car looked like they needed help or something, and so this passing by driver wanted to be a good Samaritan and see if they could offer some assistance to them. So this could be like a person like you or whoever, but the driver pulls to the side of the shoulder to walk up to that car and see if they can help him in any way. So suppose in this situation, in this hypothetical, you get close to the car, and when you get there, you notice that the individual in the driver's seat is still there strapped in, but they're unconscious right now. So they're not responsive to you or to any of your questions, because as you walk up, you start asking questions like, hey, excuse me, hello, sir, or ma'am, Are you okay? How are you doing? Can you hear me? What's up? And they're not answering. They're not dead. You can see that they're breathing, but they're not responsive, so they're unconscious. Now, in the same moment, as you look at them and you see they can't respond, you notice that there's some damage to the front of the car, and perhaps just a couple of little tendrils of smoke emanating from the hood area where their damage is at. So now, in my hypothetical, the person that you are, or whoever that came to the aid of this motorist, is worried about them because of the damaged condition of the car, the smoke, and the fact that they're unconscious. What do you think someone might choose to do in an effort to, help this person or to prevent something bad from happening? Okay, good, Madeline. Take them out of the car, right? And why? Well, probably you're thinking because if they remain in the car, who knows? It could get engulfed in flames if the engine catches fire or explodes, and you don't want that to happen. So, Sarah, I see you give another example. Call the police, sure. But I was kind of fishing for that first response because it helps me to fill out the rest of the example. So let's go with taking them out of the car, okay? You gently remove them then from the car and place them off to the side where they're no longer in harm's way. So now let's say that some time passes. See if their blood type matches the 5 from earlier. LOL, come on. But yeah, we don't want to go out, don't tell people that's what Dr. Village is teaching you to just, kill all the people for their organs. But as I digress, back to the example. You move them from the car. And now a few minutes have passed, and like first responders, paramedics and stuff, they're starting to arrive. They weren't there. You were the first person on the scene to notice this, but now they're coming. Maybe, as you said, Sarah, you did call the police, so you did them both. But anyway, now they've arrived. And some guys that are paramedics see you, they see the person on the ground, and they walk straight up to you and they say, hello. First of all, how do you know this person? What is your guys' relation or connection? And you just tell them, I don't know them at all. I'm a total stranger. I was just passing by and I saw their car. And then when I came up close, I could see that they needed some help. And so then they say, okay, well, when you came here, like, tell us the story about how they're on the ground. Like, did you just come up? They're already on the ground, or how did they get there? And you say, oh, okay, no. Well, that's the thing. I removed them from the car. When I first got here, they were in the car. I was worried that the car could catch fire or something. You see the damage. So I thought, out of an abundance of caution, just gently remove them and lay them out on the ground. Now suppose the paramedic's getting a little annoyed with you and they're saying this. Come on, though. I'm sorry, I know you're just trying to help, but you really should have just waited a few minutes longer for the professionals, because you shouldn't just be moving people like that when you don't know the extent of their injuries, right? Because, for example, if they have a neck problem right now, like if they have a severed vertebrae or something in their spine, then when you move them without a proper back brace and a backboard, you might actually cause them to suffer from a worse form of paralysis than if you had just left them there. And I know you thought the car would blow up, but come on, this is not Hollywood. These cars don't basically blow up. So anyway, now you're feeling a little embarrassed, and you're like, come on, though, I was just trying to do the right thing. But suppose let's pursue our hypothetical down to the last conclusion. So they get this guy back to the ER or whatever, and lo and behold, they find out that, yes, because you had inadvertently moved them too early, you caused their spinal column to detach in a more damaging way, and now they've lost full motor control from the neck down for the rest of their life. If you had just not been there and you had never intervened, then this person would have been safely removed by the paramedics and would have had full motor control for the rest of their life. So, okay, it's a hypothetical, but let's go over our two theories as you understand them right now. In utilitarianism, would this have been the wrong thing or the right thing to do, what you did? Did you do something wrong in utilitarianism, yes or no? Sorry, Madeline, wrong answer. I mean, what's the answer, Joseph? You're saying yes or no. I'm asking you, was it wrong or right? It was wrong. It was not the right thing to do. And why not? It's easy to say, but you should say it to me so I know that you understand. The wrong action was taken under utilitarian ethics because of the simple fact that the consequences were bad, right? If you had not ever done this, then they would have had so much more happiness and pleasure throughout the remainder of their life with the full motor control of their body that they would have otherwise had. So through your action, negative consequences, extremely negative consequences have come to pass, and that means it was bad in a theory that only cares about utilitarianism, okay? But now, and Madeline, I see you want to say it's the right thing, but you have to be attentive to what theory that we are describing. You'll get your answer that it's right, but it depends on the theory. So in Kantian ethics, which we've only said so far is about the intention, would this have been the wrong action or not wrong? To the Kantian theory, a different theory. Yes, in that theory, it's not wrong. It was the right thing to do, or at least it wasn't wrong. And why wasn't it wrong? because they don't focus on consequences. Instead, they focus on what? Well, you can tell me. What's the reason that it wasn't wrong? Because the intention was good. There was no intention to harm, no intention to, cause this person to suffer. To the total contrary, the intent behind it was to preserve their life and to prevent them from coming to greater harm. Now, did it work out in the way your intention had hoped? No. But to a Kantian, we don't say that your action ethically was immoral, because the morality of the action shouldn't depend on the things that result from it, because in some cases, Kantians insist, we can't control the consequences or fully understand what they will be in advance. The best we can do is control what we can control, which is our intentions. And so if we act with the right intentions, good intentions, then even if the outcomes don't play in our favor, we haven't done anything immoral. So Kant would ask us to evaluate the intention of the person who acts rather than all the consequences that become later. So a well-intended act is not somehow deprived of its moral nature by having bad consequences, as this example shows. On the other hand, a badly intended act cannot be vindicated by positive consequences either, according to the Kantian. So here's another example, just random. But suppose there's two kids, they're like troublemaker kind of kids, and they see two people that are just like running in the park, like joggers. And so this kid says, I don't know why I said two kids, let me make it one. One kid sees these two runners in the park, and when he sees them, he thinks to himself, okay, I'm going to just mess with these guys and I'm going to hit the dude with a slingshot. So he busts out a slingshot, pulls it back, and he aims it straight at the runner that's the front runner, and he hits him in the head. The guy falls over to the ground. And the kid's like, yeah, I got him. Like, he thought that was cool, right? Now, afterwards, the back runner sees where the kid is at, actually, and he's coming running towards him. And the kid's worried. He's like, oh no, he saw me, I'm in trouble, right? But when the guy gets up close to the kid, he says this: oh my goodness, thank you so much, young man. You have saved my life. I know that you could see that this guy was chasing me. I maybe switched up the front and back runner, sorry. But he says, this guy was chasing me, saying he was going to kill me and rob me. I was afraid for my life, and he was about to get me. And just at that moment, you hit him with the slingshot. You're a hero, my friend. Thank you so much. Okay, now, look. The kid's action in this example was done with an ill intention. It wasn't done to help anybody, to save their life. He thought he was just going to hit a runner that's running with his friend in the head and laugh at that injury. What he actually did was to save the person's life and prevent them from being attacked, assaulted, killed, whatever. But in Kant's ethical system, it doesn't really matter that the consequences played out so happily in favor of everybody, because it was done with a bad intention. And so the same kind of negative moral character attaches to the action, despite the favorable consequences. So Kant would tell us, let's not focus on consequences. Sometimes you do the things that you think will produce good ones, and it won't work out. There's a saying that says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that's a bit of a cynical quote, to be honest, because what is it telling you? What's the moral? Like, don't have good intentions because they'll always go wrong? I don't think that's true either. But you take the point, right? That sometimes, despite our best efforts, things can play out negatively. On the other hand, sometimes we can intend for things to go badly or to do the wrong thing, and it might actually end up working out well. But Kant says those consequences are in a lot of ways out of our control. The determination of your will to act with a good or bad intention, that's what we should be judging the moral basis of your actions on. Now, there's more to say about Kant. I've really only given you the first kind of opening taste of it, because here are some questions that we'll clarify next meeting and get clear about. What does it mean to act with a good intention, though? Is it something specific? You're going to learn that for Kant, it actually is something very specific. He doesn't just leave it at kind of common sense, like, you're trying to do the right thing. He thinks to act with a goodwill specifically means to act from the motivation of duty to uphold the moral law. And so we'll have to learn about what that means, what duty is, what the difference is between acting from the motive of duty versus the motive of inclination or self-interest. And then we will have to talk about what he thinks the moral law is and how we could possibly discover it. Kant does believe that there is an objective moral law that can be discovered by human reason. When we tap into our reason, he thinks that that will provide us with the content of the moral law and what we're obligated and forbidden from doing, so that we should act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law and to not violate it. And if we do that to the best of our intent, then no matter what the consequences are, we'll be living good moral lives. So on the one hand, Mill and the utilitarians say, try to produce the most happiness and the best consequences for human happiness. Kant says, set your will to act with a good intention from the sake of duty. And if you do that, it doesn't really matter how the consequences go from there. Now, other comments before I close our stream for the time being. And because of the intentions, Patrick, you say wrong because it's not the best thing for you. Well, you mean in the case where the person got hurt, it's wrong, but it's not really wrong in Kant's view only because the intention was righteous in the beginning. Consequences result in more injury, yes. Oh, okay, I see that you commented on your own comment later, Patrick, not to worry. You mean I'm right. Okay, got you, Madeline. Thanks a lot. Sometimes the context can get lost a little when it's pure text, so I'm just making sure to clarify that. Intent was good, right, because intentions were good. It would have been wrong if you knew that would happen, right? But in the case we have, you didn't know it would happen, and therefore no bad intent, no ill motives. Kid is a menace, definitely. Dennis the Menace type kid. Is there a way to have a blend of both? That is an interesting question. You know, to me, it's very tempting to want to blend both because both, in my view, have like a kernel of truth. There are extreme examples that show the failures and problems of utilitarianism, and there are also examples that show problems with Kantianism, as we will develop next time when we get to the objections. In my view, it's really hard, you know. It depends almost on the context that one is in when they judge which ethical theory is better. I guess overall, I favor utilitarian ethics, but I'm also a believer in human rights, and I don't think that just anything is acceptable if it generates the most happiness. So I guess I'm kind of like maybe a restricted utilitarian. But I'm a strong believer in rights, and I fundamentally think there are some actions that should never be done. So that part of me is kind of Kantian. In a way, I'm kind of muddled between the two ethical theories because they offer us interesting things that in both cases make some sense. Giovanni, you say Kantianism sounds more present-focused and acknowledges ignorance and the fact that we won't fully know the repercussions of our actions. That's true, and that's a fair thing to say. Okay, well, good. Is ignorance bliss? I don't know. Those that remain in a state of ignorance may feel blissful, but then when they don't act in the way that the knowledge would have allowed them to act, they might be disadvantaged in the future, like, say, people who don't want to understand the efficacy of vaccines, remaining ignorant on that point, therefore not protecting themselves, getting sick. You know, so ignorance is bliss maybe until reality bites. But that's enough for today, guys. I really appreciate you guys being here again, and we'll be back on Wednesday. So I'll be sending you guys another set of links for the Wednesday class meeting and the office hours if anyone intends to go. Let me mail those out in the morning because I have a few things to do tonight, but you'll get that message in Canvas as an announcement in the morning time. So for now, guys, feel free to say goodbye and good night and everything. And I'll see you soon, and hopefully you're having a good week so far. Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care, and until next time, I'm signing off. Thank you. Yes, I'll say hi to Peachy and Eddie too. Thanks. Okay, see you soon.